British farmhouses do not announce themselves. They sit at the end of lanes that narrow until the hedgerows touch your wing mirrors, stone walls, slate roofs, and boot scrapers by the door. They have been doing this for 400 years or more. Most of them hold nothing stranger than damp and woodworm, but some of them hold rather more than that. These are 15 farmhouses across Britain where something has taken up residence that does not appear on any tenancy agreement. This is cottage dreams. We begin in the Cotswolds, where the stone is the colour of cold honey, and the villages look like they were designed to sell calendars. South of Stroud, on the edge of Watton under Edge, a building sits at the foot of a hill that has been unsettling people since the 12th century. The ancient Ram Inn was built around 1145, originally as a priest's house to shelter masons working on the nearby church of St. Mary the Virgin. It later became a farmhouse, then an inn, then something else entirely. The building sits on the intersection of two ley lines, one running from Stonehenge to the site, the other crossing it at a right angle. Beneath the floor, during renovation work in the 20th century, remains were found. The skeleton of a child, positioned alongside broken daggers in what archaeologists identified as a pre-Christian ritual burial. The site had been sacred ground long before the Normans arrived, long before the Christians. The Ram Inn was built on top of something that was already old. John Humphreys purchased the property in 1968 and lived there alone for nearly 50 years. He documented disturbances so persistent and so varied that the house became one of the most investigated private dwellings in Britain. Objects moved, doors opened and closed in rooms that had been sealed. Figures were seen in the Bishop's Inn room and the Witches' room on the upper floor. Humphreys died in 2017. On Cotswold community forums, contributors who visited during his lifetime describe a building where the temperature changed from room to room in ways that had nothing to do with insulation. One regular visitor noted that their camera failed in the same doorway on 4 separate occasions across 3 different years. They stopped taking the camera after that. Crossing the Severn and heading west into South Wales, the landscape changes. The valleys tighten, the sky lowers. Near the village of Treharris, between Merthyr Tydfil and Caerphilly, a Tudor manor and former farmstead sits on a rise above the River Taff. Llancaiach Fawr was built around 1530. Its walls are 3 feet thick. Its windows are narrow. It was designed for a world where comfort was less important than survival. Colonel Edward Pritchard owned the manor during the English Civil War. In 1645, he hosted King Charles I under this roof. Then he switched his allegiance to Parliament. The betrayal did not go unremarked. Soldiers quartered here during the conflict. Some of them died in these rooms. The manner of their deaths is not recorded in detail, but the building remembers something. Llancaiach Fawr is now a living history museum managed by Caerphilly County Borough Council. Staff wear period costume and conduct tours in character. What they do not include in the tour are their own experiences. The South Wales Echo collected testimonies from employees who described a figure on the main staircase wearing clothing that matches no costume in the museum's inventory. Environmental monitoring by CAD, the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Service, recorded temperature drops in the basement kitchen that could not be explained by ventilation or structural factors. On Welsh community forums, delivery drivers serving the Treharris area describe a specific reluctance to approach the property after dark. They do not elaborate. They do not need to. We return to Lancashire now, to a building that has been called the most haunted domestic dwelling in Britain. Chingle Hall sits near the village of Goosnach, 6 miles north of Preston, at the end of a lane that locals prefer not to walk after sunset. It was built in 1260 by the de Singleton family. Parts of the original structure survive, making it one of the oldest inhabited brick buildings in England. The walls carry 600 years of Catholic suffering in their mortar. The Wall family, who held the hall from the 16th century, were recusant Catholics who sheltered priests during the decades when practicing the faith in England could mean execution. 6 priest holes have been discovered during renovation work. Hidden chambers behind panelling where men waited in silence while search parties moved through the building above them. One of those priests, Father John Wall, was captured, tried, and hanged at Worcester in 1679. He was beatified in 1888 and canonised in 1970 as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. Moisture appears on the brickwork of Chingle Hall that structural surveys have failed to explain through damp or groundwater. Footsteps sound in rooms directly above the concealed priest holes when those rooms are verified empty. On Lancashire forums and on Canal World, residents of Goosnarg describe a reluctance to approach the lane that goes back generations. Their grandparents told them to stay away. They passed the instruction to their own children without ever being able to articulate precisely what they were afraid of. Across the Mersey now and into something unexpected. Speke Hall sits on the southern edge of Liverpool, less than a mile from John Lennon Airport. A Tudor timber-framed manor surrounded by estate farmland, built between 1490 and 1612 by the Norris family. It is one of the finest surviving examples of black and white timber frame architecture in Britain. It is also a National Trust property. The car park takes coaches. The tea room serves scones. None of this has discouraged what moves inside the building after hours. The Norris family were Catholic recusants. Priest holes, eavesdrops, and hidden passages thread through the structure like a second nervous system. One member of the family, Mary Norris, walked into the grounds and was never found. Staff and visitors report a woman in white along the Yew Tree Avenue. The tapestry room produces consistent reports of a presence standing behind seated visitors. National Trust volunteers who have worked at the property for years describe phenomena they do not discuss with the public. The Liverpool Echo covered a formal complaint by an events caterer who refused to return to Speke Hall after an experience in the Great Hall that they described only as enough. The landscape opens now. We are heading northeast into the Pennine uplands, into country where the stone turns dark and the sky seems closer to the ground. The farmsteads around Pendle Hill in Lancashire carry 4 centuries of unease that no amount of heritage trail signage has been able to domesticate. In 1612, 12 people from the farms and settlements around Pendle were tried for witchcraft at Lancaster Castle. 10 were hanged on the 20th of August that year. Alison Device, Elizabeth Device, Anne Whittle, known as Chattocks. Their names are in the court records. Their alleged meeting place, Malkin Tower, has never been conclusively located, though archaeological and documentary research by historian Robert Poole of Lancaster University places the probable site near Blacko Tower. The farmsteads they lived in, worked from, and were dragged out of still stand in the landscape. Altered, yes. Extended and modernised, but the same stone, the same ground. Parish records and local agricultural society minutes document unexplained behaviour in livestock in specific fields around Barley and roughly going back to the 18th century. Walkers on UK Hill Walking and Lancashire forums describe the atmosphere on the path between Barley and the Nick of Pendle in terms that circle the same absence. The silence is wrong. The distance between the farmsteads and the ridge above them seems to change depending on the light. Tourism data shows the Pendle Trail draws approximately 40,000 walkers per year. A notable number of them report experiences they had not anticipated and struggle to describe once they are back at the car park. South now to Bradford, where the textile mills gave way to dual carriageways and the medieval ground beneath the city centre is mostly forgotten. Bowling Hall stands in a park on the southern edge of the city, a partly medieval, partly Tudor manor and former farmstead, parts of it dating to the 14th century. During the Civil War, the Royalist Earl of Newcastle quartered his troops at Bowling Hall before the storming of Bradford in 1643. According to tradition recorded in multiple local histories, Newcastle ordered the massacre of every inhabitant of the town. That night, a figure appeared at his bedside, a woman. She pulled at his bedclothes 3 times and spoke 3 words: "Pity, poor Bradford." Newcastle reduced his order. The massacre was limited rather than total. Whether you believe a ghost intervened in military strategy is your own concern. The people of Bradford survived, and the story entered the fabric of the building. Bradford Council manages the hall as a museum. Staff testimonies collected by the Bradford Telegraph and Argus describe the lady in white on the first-floor landing. Children visiting on school trips react to specific rooms before any briefing. The Civil War bedroom produces equipment failures and temperature drops during monitored investigations. The staff do not insist. They note it and move on. We leave the industrial north now and drop into Dorset, into the Marshwood Vale, where the lanes are so deep and so green that the sky becomes a suggestion rather than a certainty. Bettiscombe Manor is a 17th century farmhouse that holds a skull. This is not unusual in English folklore. Several houses keep screaming skulls. What makes Bettiscombe unusual is the skull's identity. The Pinney family owned the property for generations. Azariah Pinney returned from the Caribbean in the late 17th century, and according to family tradition, he brought with him an enslaved person who died at the manor and whose dying wish was to be returned to his homeland. The wish was not honoured. The skull remained, and every time it was removed from the house, screaming began that did not stop until it was brought back. In the 1960s, Professor Gilbert Causey of the Royal College of Surgeons examined the skull and determined it was female and possibly prehistoric. Not Caribbean at all, possibly Iron Age. This does not simplify the story. It deepens it. Something has been kept in this house for reasons that predate the colonial narrative by millennia. The current owners maintain the skull. It is not displayed. Visitors are not encouraged. The Marshwood Vale keeps its counsel. Crossing into North Wales, on the Flintshire Plain between Wrexham and Mold, a Jacobean mansion rises from farmland that has been worked since the medieval period. Plas Teg was built around 1610 by Sir John Trevor I. By the 20th century, it was a ruin, roofless, stripped, open to weather, and to whatever else cared to enter. Cornelia Bailey purchased the property in 1986 and began a restoration that would consume decades. What she found during the work was not limited to architectural salvage. Bailey documented persistent and escalating phenomena throughout the restoration. Figures in rooms that had not been occupied for a century, voices in corridors where no one stood, objects displaced overnight in spaces secured by scaffolding and padlocked doors. 5 distinct apparitions have been reported by independent witnesses over the years. A former servant girl appears near a well in the grounds where a body was allegedly recovered during Victorian renovation. The North Wales Chronicle and Flintshire Community Forums contain testimonies from contractors who worked on the restoration and declined to return to specific rooms. Thermal imaging and audio recording conducted during formal investigations produced results that remain unexplained. The lesson of Plas Teg is specific. When you wake a sleeping house, you may also wake what was sleeping in it. On the southern coast, in the suburbs of Portsmouth, a building stands that has been continuously occupied for longer than almost any other dwelling in England. Wymering Manor has parts dating to the Anglo-Saxon period. The Domesday Book of 1086 references the manor of Wymeringa. It has been a farmhouse, a manor, a hospital during the Second World War, a youth hostel, and a community building. Every transition left a residue. The Grey Lady appears on the upper floors. Music plays in rooms where no instrument exists. Doors open and close in areas that have been locked and verified empty. During its years as a youth hostel, wardens kept an informal log of nighttime disturbances reported by residents. The reports were consistent across individuals who had no contact with each other. The Portsmouth News covered the phenomena across multiple articles. Restoration attempts have been repeatedly delayed by funding shortfalls and what local council minutes describe with careful bureaucratic understatement as unforeseen complications. Deeper into Gloucestershire now, into the Forest of Dean, where the trees are old enough to remember the charcoal burners and the iron workings and the people who lived between them. Littledean Hall claims to be the oldest continuously inhabited house in England. Roman remains lie beneath the foundations. Saxon stonework sits inside Norman walls. The building has been accumulating history the way a river accumulates sediment, layer upon layer, pressing down. Civil War damage is still visible in the stonework. The property's records document assaults, murders, and unexplained deaths spanning centuries. The owner has described experiences to the Gloucester citizen that go beyond the atmospheric. Full apparitions in daylight, physical contact from unseen sources, objects moving in the presence of witnesses. Forest of Dean community forums contain contributions from local residents who describe Littledean not as a haunted house, but as a house that accumulates darkness. Each century adds another layer. None of them dissipate. We step back now. The register changes. On the edge of the New Forest, where Hampshire meets Wiltshire, the village of Breamore sits in farmland that has been worked without interruption since before the conquest. The Saxon church dates to around 1013. The Elizabethan manor, Breamore House, was partly destroyed by fire in 1656. The Dodington family member who set the fire killed himself afterwards. The parish records document both events with the flat precision of people who had seen enough to know that horror did not require embellishment. In the fields between the manor and the village, in August and September, when the light falls in long diagonals across the stubble, dog walkers and ramblers report a figure. A man working in land that has been left fallow. He does not look up. He does not respond to greeting. He is there, and then he is not. And the field is empty in a way that feels recent rather than permanent. On New Forest community forums, a thread spanning several years collects observations from contributors who are cautious, specific about dates and weather conditions, and entirely uninterested in sensation. They are describing what they have seen. They are not performing. Scotland now, the Western Highlands, where the rain arrives sideways and the mountains dissolve into cloud by mid-afternoon. Near Inverary, in Argyll and Bute, a cluster of stone farmhouses and agricultural buildings sits in a valley. Auchindrain is the last surviving example of a traditional West Highland farming township. Families lived and worked here communally for at least 250 years, through some of the most devastating chapters of Highland history. The township is now a museum managed by a charitable trust and recognised as a historic Scotland scheduled monument. In winter, when visitor numbers drop and the buildings stand empty under low grey skies, staff have described experiences to the Argyllshire Advertiser that they approach with care. Door latches lift in longhouses where no one has entered. Footsteps cross earth floors that show no mark. The smell of peat smoke rises in buildings where no fire has been lit in decades. The ghosts here, if that is what they are, do not belong to individuals. They belong to a way of life that ended within living memory and has not entirely agreed to leave. In the mountains of Snowdonia, at the head of a valley that narrows and darkens as you approach, a 16th century stone farmhouse sits against the hillside. Mawr Wybrnant is small, thick-walled, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above. This is the birthplace of Bishop William Morgan, who translated the Bible into Welsh in 1588. That translation is credited with preserving the Welsh language from extinction. An entire nation's voice was saved in a room the size of a modern bathroom. The National Trust maintains the property and opens it seasonally. Visitors describe an emotional weight that exceeds the dimensions of the building. A presence in the upper room, a sense of being watched from the hillside, a reluctance to linger after the light changes in the valley. Heritage Forum entries describe something difficult to name, not a ghost, not exactly, more a density, as though the significance of what happened here has saturated the stone and the air above it. You feel it before anyone tells you what the building is. You feel it more after they do. North now, into Northumberland, where the farmsteads thin out and the moorland opens, and England begins to feel like a country that has not quite finished deciding where it ends. Near the village of Elsdon in Redesdale, a farmstead called Raw Pele stands in landscape that was lawless border territory for centuries. Rivers, raiders and fugitives used this ground. In 1791, a man named William Winter murdered Margaret Crozier at this farmstead. He was convicted and hanged at Newcastle. His body was gibbeted at the crossroads above Elsdon, on the road across the moors towards Scotland. A replica gibbet post still stands at the site. The road passes close enough to touch it. Motorists report unease on this stretch that is consistent and specific, a reluctance to stop. A figure on the moorland that does not correspond to any walker or resident. Northumberland National Park rangers, quoted in the Hexham Current, describe this section of road as the one location in the park where they receive regular reports from otherwise unremarkable sources. People who do not believe in ghosts, people who drive this road for work, people who now prefer to take the longer route and do not discuss why unless asked directly. We end on Bodmin Moor, Cornwall, the granite tors dissolving into November cloud and the farmsteads becoming silhouettes without depth or distance. Jan Tregagle is the most persistent ghost in Cornish folklore, a 17th century magistrate, possibly based on a real steward of the Robartes estate at Llancaiach, so corrupt and violent in life that his spirit was condemned to impossible tasks on the moor after death, emptying Dosmary Pool with a perforated limpet shell, carrying sand from Gwenor Cove to Porthleven, tasks that can never be completed, across ground that never ends. The farmsteads around Dosmary Pool and the upper reaches of the River Fawr carry traditions linking specific buildings to Tregaigle's appearances. The howling, heard on winter nights, is usually the wind channeled through the granite. Usually. Cornwall community forums and Bodmin Moor walking groups contain decades of testimony about the moor after dark. It is not the ghost they describe. It is the quality of the darkness, the way distance behaves, the farmhouse light you see across the moor that never gets closer no matter how long you walk toward it. This is reported not as a haunting, but as a property of the landscape. Bodmin Moor does not give up its distances easily. The ground is uneven. The granite breaks through the peat in shapes that resemble things they are not. The cloud base drops, and the tors vanish, and you are standing in a place that has been grazed and farmed and lived on for thousands of years, and yet feels as though it has never been owned by anyone. The farmsteads endure. The moor permits them, and on the nights when the wind finds the right angle, and the granite hums and the light you were walking toward disappears entirely, you understand that permission can always be withdrawn.